You saw were from U.S. Central Command of strikes being leveled against Iranian shore emplacements along the Strait of Hormuz. Not to be outdone, this is an image of a Shahed drone hitting a terminal in Kuwait's international airport. So, yeah, ceasefire, not so much. Also, can I add something here? I've been covering this now for 14 weeks. 14 weeks. I mean, it's been going on for a long time. Can we get a name for this? I don't know what to call this. It's not Epic Fury because the U.S. has gone to great lengths to argue it's no longer Operation Epic Fury. We need some name for it. Is it the Persian Gulf War? We had one of those back in 1990-91. Is this Persian Gulf War 2, 3? I don't know what this is. We just need some sort of conflict. And we can't even call it really the Persian Gulf War because one of the big contentious points between the U.S. and Iran has to do with Israel and Lebanon. So I don't know what we call this anymore. But it's been going on for a long time. We're going to give you your weekly recap, what's happening right now in the Strait of Hormuz, and then what has happened over the past week. If you're new to the channel, hey, take a moment, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell so you'll be alerted about new videos as they come out. So let's come over to marine traffic and take a look at the situation. So the U.S. blockade is taking place right here from the Iran-Pakistan border down to the very northeastern tip of Oman, and you can see a large cluster of Iranian ships here off the port of Shabar. We're going to take a look at that in a minute. There's another one here off Jask. So the U.S. blockade runs this line here. The Iranians have set up the Persian Gulf Strait Authority under the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. That extends to roughly about here between the UAE and Iran, and also between the UAE and Iran inside the Persian Gulf. Now, we have some very fun images of ships in here. So, for example, we have this ship here, Jersey Devil 404. We've talked about Jersey Devil 404. It is a sailing vessel of the United States sailing in there. It's not a sailing vessel. This is more than likely a U.S. drone that is in the area, not to be outdone. There's another one here, the Dead Wallet, which is also in the region. We're going to talk a lot about passages in. Understand, we have the two competing blockades. The Iranians are controlling passage through the Strait of Hormuz here, ships that can go through the strait, and they have basically mined this area in the center part of the strait, forcing ships to go through Iranian territorial waters. At the same time, the U.S. has a blockade over here that is preventing the entrance and exit of ships that have docked in Iranian ports. So we have the competing blockades. So I want to highlight a couple of key stories going on right now as we head into week 15. So this story by Greg Miller over at Lloyd's: importers front load now to avert higher fuel surcharges and tariff bills. So the Shanghai Freight Index, this is the global spot rate, has jumped 40% in the past month. Drewry's World Container Index has also surged by 50%. That means that peak season, the normal period when you ship goods, has now arrived earlier this year. And what importers are doing are front loading, moving earlier ahead of potential higher fuel surcharges and a soon to be increased U.S. tariff. The liners initially raised spot rates to offset the higher fuel bills, but the demand has been so strong that higher rates should lift liner profits starting in third quarter 2026. So this is something we saw happen exactly like this last year, but it had to do with the tariffs. A lot of front loading early in the year, and then once the tariffs basically went down, we saw a massive uptick again. So it's going to be another crazy container year for freight. We've got this story by Toma Renan. OFAC continues Iranian LPG crackdown with fresh sanctions. 2 individuals, 12 entities, and 6 specific liquefied petroleum gas carriers were sanctioned in connection with Iranian LPG trades. The move brings this total of sanctioned gas carriers carrying Iranian LPG to 80, or nearly 75% of the Iranian trading fleet. Iranian Exchange House was also targeting. We've seen a lot of liquefied petroleum gas coming out of the Persian Gulf. It's one of the few commodities that has been moving, and a lot of that has been going to India and Pakistan. Now, the U.S. doesn't want to interdict directly those, but by posting sanctions on them, that's an indirect way of getting at them. We have this story by Lytton Nightingale. Hormuz crisis is a make or break moment for ship manager relationships with crews and owners, says intermanager chief. So seafarers face tremendous stresses as managers balance repatriation requests with readiness to sail at short notice. Von Hardenberg, who is this intermanager chief, says supporting crew well-being is a matter of survival in an era of instant crew feedback versus social channels. If a ship owner decides it's go time through the Strait of Hormuz, we have to be ready, he said. So we've seen a lot of stories coming out. The story the other week that came out was barnacles. Everyone was all of a sudden infested with barnacles. So marine growth is a big issue in the Persian Gulf. If you sit still for a period of time, you're going to get marine growth. That's true of almost everywhere, but maybe a little bit more in the Persian Gulf because of the warmer water. But the bigger issue here is the crews, I would argue. Barnacles can be handled. Crew relief is a big issue. They have been able to do crew exchanges. The problem is nobody wants to go out to these ships because you're stuck in the Persian Gulf. You're not making money, you're not making overtime, and more importantly, you're at risk. And so it's getting very difficult. We've had a hard time getting crews back on the ships after COVID, and now the Persian Gulf is not helping at all. And this last story from Lloyd's, Iranian crude exports collapse under U.S. naval blockade. May exports fell 84% from April and were 87% below the average recorded between May 2025 and April 2026. Iran has shifted to smaller tankers as very large crude carriers leaving its port face a higher risk of interdiction by U.S. forces. The export slump has forced Iran to cut crude production by 800,000 barrels per day at 10% month on month. Saudi Arabia's east-west pipeline throughout has been increasing with rising production, but constraints at Yanbu is limiting exports. Again, it's dock space. It's dock and pier space in Yanbu. You can move 7 million barrels across the pipeline across Saudi Arabia. Problem is you can only load 4.5 million onto ships, and so that creates the problem. So let's take a look at the reports that are out. This is the Joint Maritime Information Center's advisory. I'm sure they're going to drop the 7 June report as soon as I finish filming this because that's the way it always happens. But this is the report as of 4 June. And you'll see here that they're showing really no major incidents over the period of this last report. They have reduced the level of threat off the Somali coast. It is now down to moderate. Strait of Hormuz remains critical, with the Arabian Gulf, Gulf of Oman severe, and all other areas are moderate. Their latest numbers they have for transits through the Strait of Hormuz was 3 June of 7 transits and 2 June of 4 transits. And you can see the breakdown in more numbers here from 28 May down to 3 June. So we're going to talk about a story here in a minute that talked about the fact that there was an unnamed source from the United States that said about 1,000 ships have come out of the Persian Gulf. Well, the problem is the Joint Maritime Information Center is only showing about 500 that have come out if you tabulate their data from 28 February forward. And this chart kind of shows you that we really have never seen more than 20 ships come out at a most here, and that was an off. Most times we're seeing single digits through. Now, there is a lot of discrepancy, I will tell you, in the numbers coming in and out for a couple of reasons. Number one, there are a lot of small vessels that move in and out of the Strait of Hormuz, and so sometimes those are counted. Some ships are moving between the Strait of Hormuz but not coming out into the northern Arabian Sea. They're not passing the U.S. blockade line. So they're just moving cargo in and out between outside and inside the Persian Gulf through the Strait of Hormuz. So that could be part of the discrepancy that we're seeing. So if we look at the data put out from the United Against a Nuclear Iran, they are showing at least 71 tankers loaded with Iranian oil, primarily crude, but also some other products that are either sitting inside the Persian Gulf in the Strait of Hormuz or out in the Gulf of Oman. This imagery from 5 June indicates an accumulation of tankers off the Cargill and anchorage. Approximately 22 tankers were spotted in the anchorage, at least 14 of which are laden with Iranian oil. Those are the ones highlighted in red. Now, there have been at least 87 Iranian oil loadings, 47 of them at Karg Island. This represents approximately about 89 million barrels of Iranian oil with an estimated revenue of $7 billion. This image shows you the anchorage off the port of Chabahar. This is that port that is just to the west of the Iranian-Pakistan border out in the Gulf of Oman. On 5 June, there were 14 tankers, including 11 Iran-flagged tankers and 3 dark fleet tankers, all laden with Iranian oil. They're highlighted there in red, along with 15 cargo ships. And then further to the west, this is just outside the Strait of Hormuz in the Gulf of Oman. This is the port of Jask. On 3 June, 8 tankers were observed in the anchorage, 6 of them laden with Iranian crude. 4 of the 6 laden tankers had moved from an anchorage inside the Persian Gulf near the Greater and Lesser Tomb Islands, and that was the previous week. This is the May 2026 report put out by United Against Nuclear Iran on oil export data as of May 2026. This is put out by Charlie Brown and Jemima Shelley. So in May 2026, Iran was able to export 64,000 barrels per day. Back in April, it was 1.1 million, and in March, it was 1.1 million. And you can see the vast majority of that goes to China. If we look at total oil exports per month going back from June of 2025 to May of 2026, for May, there was a grand total of 2 million barrels that was exported out of Iran. That's a 93% volume drop from April due to disruptions. The estimated value of oil exported in May is 219 million. That's also down 94%. So far in 2026, Iran has exported 177.4 million barrels with an estimated value of almost $15 billion. Now, this has led to clustering of Iranian tankers in different places. We talked about off the coast of Sri Lanka, off the coast of Pakistan and India, and particularly off the coast of Malaysia in Southeast Asia. One of the things that Iranian tankers have done notoriously is conduct what's called ship-to-ship transfers, where they take their oil, put it into other tankers to mask the identity of where the oil came from. This large anchorage off the east coast of Malaysia may become a future target for the United States, as we will explain. I want to show you this data by Vortex, which shows you global crude oil afloat. Now, there's always usually somewhere in the range of about 100 million barrels of crude oil afloat. This graph shows you it in thousands of barrels. So right here, right around 100 million barrels is where we're at. Now, 2020, we had a huge spike because of COVID. Everybody stopped driving. So we hit this massive peak. And then you can see since 2020, we have kind of fluctuated right around that 100 million. Everybody understood that there needed to be more oil afloat should there be a disruption, and so that was done. The difficulty we're seeing now is a decline in not just the amount of oil that's afloat, but also the amount of oil that's ashore. So this chart shows you crude oil inventories in the United States. And what you see here is that for 2026, we're below the 3-year average, but the disturbing aspect of this chart is the slope of that graph. How fast it's falling. Now, this is not falling down to zero. This is 740 million barrels. And you'll see we've been as low as 760 million barrels back in 2023. The problem is without the influx of more oil coming in, this creates a problem. What's happening in the United States is twofold. Number one, we do import oil. We get 250 million barrels of oil from the Persian Gulf. That's not coming now. Now, it's coming from other places. We're getting it from Venezuela and other places, but not at the level that we need. The other problem we have is we're exporting a lot. There's a big draw on U.S. resources, particularly oil. Did that whole video where we talked about the line of tankers coming to the United States. Well, that line of tankers is pulling anywhere from 4 to 6 million barrels a day out of the United States. And if we can't replenish 4 to 6 million into the reserve or into the stockpiles, that creates the problem. That's why it's really important for everybody to understand that this is not over. If the Persian Gulf opens up tomorrow, we are in for a rough year ahead. It is not easy to fix. Yes, Oil is down below $100 a barrel. But the problem is going to be this. You're not going to see oil and gas and diesel shortages in the United States or most developed nations around the world. What you will see is escalating prices. If you think it's expensive now, it's going to get more expensive because of the competition for the finite supply that's out there. And you will see shortages in certain areas, in certain commodities, in certain countries around the world. Without a doubt, you're already starting to see that. All right, let's do our week in review. Last week we got up to May 31st. We're going to pick up here on June 1st with stories up to June 7th. Of course, a lot has been happening here. So, June 1st, Trump says deal will work out well even as U.S.-Iran clash. So, I have to take a moment here and just talk about the fact that we have been going back and forth with agreements with Iran. So, real quick, put this together for you. February 28th, on the initial attacks, they announced the start of major combat operations to eliminate imminent threats. President Trump warned the Iranian people to stay sheltered and urged them to take over their own government. Then on March 11th, President Trump stated the U.S. was ahead of the timeline, telling the press that Iran has, quote, no Navy, they have no Air Force, and that U.S. military objectives should be completed, quote, very soon. April 1st, declared the U.S. was on track to complete all military objectives shortly and vowed to hit them extremely hard over the next 2 to 3 weeks to permanently disable their ability to project power. April 7th, an ultimatum on the Strait of Hormuz, you may remember this one, warned that, quote, a civilization will die tonight, unquote, if a deal wasn't reached, but shortly after pulled back on threats to hit civilian targets, stating he would suspend the bombing if Iran agreed to a 2-week ceasefire and the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz. May 18th, on the ceasefire negotiation, President Trump warned that there won't be anything left of Iran if they don't get moving fast and make a peace deal. He rejected prior Iranian counterproposals, calling the ceasefire offer unbelievably weak and a piece of garbage. June 3rd, on the impact of the war, President Trump defended the conflict as, quote, not a big thing for us, unquote, asserting that the U.S. military is dominant and the economy is thriving. Well, gas and diesel prices are up through the roof, and more importantly, we're seeing global shocks to a variety of areas, not just gas and diesel, but liquefied natural gas, liquefied petroleum gas, ammonia, sulfur, helium, fertilizer, and all of those, and particularly those latter, have long-term impacts that we will see. June 7th, on the nuclear objective, maintained that preventing a nuclear weapon was the primary reason for the war, although that was not one of the top 4 reasons given at the very beginning of the war, claiming Iran has already agreed they're not going to have a nuclear weapon. Through nuclear experts note this pledge is not new. So, I mean, the original issue was to degrade the Iranian military, to degrade their ballistic missile threat, and to basically halt their ability to produce more weapons. That was kind of the stated objectives. So as I showed you in the beginning, not exactly sure how we're in a ceasefire when the U.S. is attacking Iran and Iran is attacking U.S. allies, Bahrain, Kuwait. It is not a ceasefire. And I understand the guise of the ceasefire because of Epic Fury and the war powers authorization of Congress. Congress just had a vote the other day in the House of Representatives voting for the war powers resolution to go into effect, but it's not going to get anywhere in the Senate. Plus, President Trump can veto it, so it doesn't really matter one way or the other. But Trump says this deal will work out well. I'm waiting to see that. Second, France intercepts another Russian shadow fleet tanker as Macron expands sanctions crackdown. So while we're focusing on the Strait of Hormuz and what's happening in the Persian Gulf, around the world, France, in particularly, along with other European Union nations and the British, have been targeting Russian dark fleet vessels, the shadow fleet vessels. In particular, this vessel that was a stateless vessel, had no official registry. I think it was registered in Madagascar. But Madagascar says, no, we just, register small animals for Disney movies. That's all we do. So on June 1st, Iran announced a halt to message exchanges with the U.S. over Israel. Israel is kind of the wild card here. We don't talk about it enough, but we really should, because this is a 3-way fight. U.S. and Israel versus Iran. The one lever, I will argue, that the U.S. has over Iran when it comes to the Persian Gulf, the Strait of Hormuz, and the Gulf of Oman, is if they can get Israel to back off. But Israel probably will not back off. Israel sees an opportunity here to ensure its safety It is conducting operations in southern Lebanon, and it sees the degradation of the Iranian military, their nuclear capability, and even the cutting off the head of the Iranian government as a plus for them. So it's very hard for the U.S. to restrain the Israelis in many ways. Yet I'd argue that is the one tool that President Trump can use to get a deal on the Strait of Hormuz. June 1st, shipping industry says Hormuz peace deal alone won't bring ships back. I think that's such a key thing. Even if you get peace, does shipping come back in? Again, the Houthi began attacking ships in November of 2023, and it was only in September of 2025 that we started seeing ships starting to come back, and now they're not even coming back now. So, I mean, if the Houthi can cause shipping to avoid an area, the Iranians can do a lot more than that, which means that even if you do get shipping back, it's going to be so much more expensive. The Iranian war is pushing the global gas trade into the shadows. So the gas sector has been one that's gotten a lot of attention. I talked about that with the Lloyd story before, where the sanctions are being done against liquefied petroleum gas. We've seen a lot of LPG tankers coming out of the Strait of Hormuz. Probably the most common petroleum carrier coming out is LPG tankers. A lot of them are going to India and Pakistan, and I have to wonder whether or not this targeting of gas is going to have an issue with India and Pakistan and the United States. Mediterranean Shipping Company confirmed that the container ship that was hit, the MSC Suriska 5, was hit twice by projectiles off Iraq. And this is the ship coming out of the port of Qusar. This ship was operating kind of as a shuttle ship within the Persian Gulf, moving containers among the different ports. Mediterranean Shipping Company is not sailing ships through the Strait of Hormuz because they had 2 ships grabbed by the Iranians, but instead they have set up an overland route coming through the Red Sea and the Gulf of Oman route. And then ships like the Suriska 5 is picking up the containers and moving them around the Gulf. Secretary Marco Rubio tells Congress no Iran sanctions relief for reopening Strait of Hormuz. So a contentious hearing with Secretary Rubio over this. A lot of back and forth over the Persian Gulf, obviously, and the Strait of Hormuz. But Rubio said on Tuesday that President Trump's negotiating team has not offered Iran sanctions relief in exchange for the opening of the Strait of Hormuz. The problem is I got to give them something to offer the Strait of Hormuz, because right now we're at a deadlock. The U.S. cannot force open the Strait of Hormuz. They can send their ships in and they can sail destroyers in. The problem is, are you going to get commercial ships to come through? And there's no clear indication that the commercial ships are going to do this. U.S. forces disable a sanctioned tanker bound for Iran as blockade enforcement continues. So the ship in question here is the motor tanker Lexi. This is a Botswana flag, and Botswana should raise big alarms for everybody, because Botswana has been a traditional kind of false flag. Botswana is not registering a lot of vessels. According to U.S. Central Command, the vessel failed to comply with directions from U.S. forces multiple times over a 24-hour period. A U.S. aircraft fired a Hellfire missile into the ship's engine room. This seems to be the traditional method now for stopping ships, is firing Hellfires, and it prevented it from reaching Iranian waters. Now, the ship is a former Cameroon flag vessel that has been under OFAC sanctions since March of 2025. This marks the 6th ship that has been attacked by the United States for failing to stop at the blockade line or for breaking the blockade. Tankers gather outside Persian Gulf in wager on Hormuz reopening. Now, I have a little problem with this story because there's been tankers waiting there the whole time. We have not seen the mass exodus of very large crude carriers heading over to the United States and other places. There have been a lot of tankers waiting for this to happen. Now, we think there was also some ship-to-ship transfers that may have been happening in the Gulf of Oman, with some ships getting oil, potentially from Iran or from other sources. But everybody is waiting for the Persian Gulf to open. You cannot replace the 20 million barrels a day of oil coming out of the Persian Gulf with any other source. Yes, you're getting 1 million, 1.5 million out of the UAE pipeline. Yes, you're getting 4.5 million through Yanbu. But again, that's 6 million out of 20 million. We're still missing 14 million barrels a day. U.S. looks to unblock Hormuz with quiet version of Project Freedom. So you may remember Project Freedom. This was the operation undertaken by the U.S. They brought 3 U.S. destroyers into the Persian Gulf. They escorted out 2 U.S. vessels, the Alliance Fairfax and the CS Anthem. They put on board U.S. Navy tactical officers. These are strategic sea lift officers. They put on board Marine detachments to provide defense against unmanned aerial and surface vessels. And they provided protection against missiles, both cruise and ballistic, and they ran the vessels out along with air cover from the U.S. aircraft carriers and helicopters provided from the 82nd Airborne, 18th Airborne Corps. Now, the U.S. stopped doing those physical convoys, but instead have been very quietly helping ships sneak out of the Strait of Hormuz through the southern route, south of the main channel, through an area swept by U.S. unmanned mine countermeasure vessels. Plus, they provide air cover with fixed-wing aircraft and rotary. Now, this has been done clandestinely, although not very clandestinely because we're talking about it, and it's been around for quite a while. Everybody knew this was happening. But they are helping get ships out. They're not helping ships get in, and this is the big problem. Even when we talk about ships transiting Strait of Hormuz, not a lot are getting in. Really, the only ships that are going in are those that have approval from Iran. None of the others are getting in, and we're going to hit a point here, again, week 14, about 4 months in, supplies in a lot of countries in the Persian Gulf are going to start hitting the bottom. And they're going to need supplies coming in by ship. It's going to be hard to do those supplies overland. And that's going to cause major issues. UK and France finalized post-war Hormuz mine-clearing mission. I want to highlight the one word that's really important there. Post-war. The UK and France are not going into this place until the US and the Iranians agree to stop shooting at each other and at commercial shipping. There's no way the Europeans go in and do this, and that is a key provision. They want to go in after the fact and clear any residual mines that are in the area. Secretary Rubio talked about mines in his hearing. Panama Canal. Oh God! Just when you think nothing else can go wrong. Panama Canal announces they're reducing the Neo-Panamax draft limit as El Nino concerns mount. So if you follow this channel, you may remember back in 2024, we had an issue with the Panama Canal. During the height of global supply chain and issues, there was low water level in the Panama Canal. Panama Canal has 3 locks at each end. They are filled by Gatun Lake, a freshwater lake. I have an app on my phone that gives me the water levels at Gatun Lake. I really need to get a life. I mean, I have no life. When that water level drops below 84 feet, you run into problems, and that's what's happening. The El Nino that happened in 2024 reduced the level of the lake, and what that meant was the big lane, built in 2026, could not handle all vessels and actually had to reduce the draft of ships and the number of ships. We went from handling 36 ships a day down to 22. If that happens again, we are screwed. I mean, I want to say something else, but I'll try to keep it PG here. We are absolutely, waist deep in ship at that moment. It's going to be bad because what we're seeing is record numbers heading to the Panama Canal now, especially oil, liquefied petroleum gas, liquefied natural gas, heading to Asia, heading to California, you name it, they're jammed up. And when this happens in Panama, what Panama does is they start reducing the number of transits through, and then they start open bidding some slots so that you got to pay extra to go through, millions of dollars to buy those slots. It's going to get expensive really, really fast. Maritime Labor Coalition renews calls to end Jones Act waiver on the law's 106th anniversary. So you may not know, the anniversary of the Jones Act is June 5th. 1920. That's when the Jones Act was passed, the very first piece of a national American maritime strategy. And on the 106th anniversary, maritime leaders called for the end of the waiver. Now, I'm going to say this, and I mean this in all due respect to people I know very well who are fighting against this waiver. You're doing a terrible job. I mean, you really, really are. You need to do better. Those who are in favor of the waivers are doing a much better social media presence. They are getting data out there and facts out there, whereas those who oppose the Jones Act waiver are not. You would think that the Jones Act waiver ships are the only ones moving oil around the United States. There are 56 Jones Act tankers that are moving, they have a capacity of almost 4 million deadweight tons. They can move a boatload of oil and goods around it. And they do it on a common basis all the time. For every waiver there are 2, 3, 4 Jones Act tankers moving cargo. And that's the number they need to be talking about. Plus, the problem with the Jones Act waivers is they're going to be expensive. They're going to be fly by night because they're going to go jump other places. And a lot of the oil and fuel that they're moving is being shuffled around so that it can be exported to other ports. I just think the coalition that supports the Jones Act doesn't do a good job in conveying it. I do think that the ones who in support of the waivers could make better points than they do make. I think they're so happy to make points on this, they get blinded by issues. For example, like a COSCO, a Chinese overseas shipping company vessel hauling asphalt from Louisiana up to Connecticut. That is a Chinese state-owned vessel. That's not great. You should not be applauding that. That should be an issue that you have. You should also be highlighting the fact that California has basically screwed itself in some of its decisions to curtail refineries and production on the West Coast. This is a big problem we should be looking at. Why are we not building more pipelines to connect the Gulf Coast of the United States with the West Coast? And there's a lot of issues that are happening here that go to energy, and that's it. And I just think that we should see a better effort being put forth and a discussion on this. This is a great moment to discuss the Jones Act, in my opinion. It really is. We should have this conversation about it. The problem is the Trump administration is talking about pro-American shipbuilding, pro-American everything. Yet at the same time, you have Kevin Hassett and Stephen Miller in the White House trying to do everything they can to torpedo the pro-American Jones Act. It's really a mixed message. It's shocking, I tell you, that we see this coming out of this administration. So in a statement Friday, the Department of War/Defense conducted a maritime interdiction and right of visit on board the tanker Divina. This was out in Indo-PACOM's area, so not in Central Command, but actually in Indo-PACOM. So this is probably out in the central to eastern Indian Ocean. According to the statement, we will continue global maritime enforcement to disrupt illicit networks and interdict vessels providing material support to Iran wherever they operate. So this vessel has a really shaky past. Our good buddies over at Tanker Trackers posted this on the ship. The Divina, also known as the Lenore, is laden with 1.9 million barrels of Iranian crude. She departed Iran on March 23rd and spent the next 6 weeks hiding off Gali in Sri Lanka. She loaded the oil at Karg back on March 20th. Lenore's AIS is now back online as a result of today's interdiction. She has transported roughly 20 million barrels of Iranian oil since 2024 and was placed under sanctions on October 11th of 2024. She is showing to be Curacao flagged, but again, according to the statement from the United States, she is stateless, meaning that her registry is false, and under UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, Article 110, Section 1D, navies can board stateless vessels. This is the same criteria the French used to board that ship earlier in the news stories. Same reason that they're boarding this ship here. Peak season and Hormuz crisis fuels new surge in container shipping rates. So we talked about this earlier, that big peak we're seeing right now in container shipping. We're going to see that happen right now with additional surcharges. Talked about the Federal Maritime Commission and the testimony by the chairperson, Laura DiBello, how the FMC in the United States is being proactive in having the shipping lines have to prove these surcharges before they can incur. But again, they have to give 30 days notice. But after the 30 days, they can start doing it. Treasury is targeting Iranian LPG smuggling network as U.S. pressure campaign intensifies. So again, this is the economic fury aspect of the program to hurt Iranian shipping. So it's not just the blockade, it's the economic aspect. U.S. counts far more Hormuz ship transits than commercial tracking data shows. So I posted this story, and I'm not crazy about this story because it's coming from an unnamed source, and I don't buy it. I just don't. I want to know where they're getting the 1,000 commercial ship transits. And again, what does this mean? Is it 1,000 ships just back and forth through the Strait of Hormuz? Does this count, entries and exits? What does this count? I hate when they post stories like this, but I want to bring it up because it's important to note it, because somebody will be talking about the fact that 1,000 ships have come out, and I don't think that's true. Asia to U.S. container rates spike 109% since Iran war started. So we've seen some really high spikes. One of the biggest right now is actually Asia to Eastern Mediterranean, which makes sense because those big container ships have to go all the way around Africa and through the Strait of Gibraltar to get into the Mediterranean. But we're seeing the same thing here as we're seeing fuel costs jump. One of the big stories that I don't have here, but it was mentioned earlier this week, was that bunker fuel isn't going to be a shortage as some people thought initially on, because they're readjusting where bunker fuel is, but definitely the cost is going to be higher, and that's going to be a big issue. So OPEC Plus, oil producing exporting countries plus, is set to raise its output of oil here for the fourth time this year. This is obviously meant to help offset the shortages coming out of the Strait of Hormuz, but it cannot meet all those requirements. So a very, again, interesting week happening here. And again, trying to give you a snapshot of what has happened, not just over the past week, but where global shipping is at right now because of these disruptions. I can't say this enough. 11% of all goods go in and out of the Strait of Hormuz, 20% of oil out of the Strait of Hormuz. And what we have effectively done is clamp that artery shut, and it's causing damage to the rest of the global circulatory system that is trade. That's the best analogy I have for it, and that is the way you should be thinking about that. We have got to see this get open. Unfortunately, there is not a military solution to this. Back in the 1980s, there was a military solution, but that was only a portion of it, because what we were escorting back in 1987 and 88 were U.S. and Kuwaiti reflagged tankers. The other tankers were just taking their own chances going through. And what we saw was massive war risk insurance to go through, anywhere from 5 to 10%, depending on the level of conflict. And we weren't exporting anywhere near as much oil during that period of time. In the 1980s, there was a big curtailment of oil because of what had happened in the 70s. Also, we didn't really see the rest of the other world coming up in oil demand. We didn't have really China, for example, and India consuming as much oil as they do today. That's the big difference. And so this disruption is massive. The Trump administration, the United States, has got to acknowledge that the conflict that they and Israel initiated against Iran has caused this to happen. Now, who's responsible for this? Okay, yeah, U.S. and Israel attacked Iran, but Iran is targeting ships. They're hitting ships. And so Iran is as culpable as this. And let's be clear, Iran was hitting ships before the U.S. struck. Go back to 2022, go back to 2019. I can take you back all the way and talk about Iranian attacks on shipping throughout this period of time. One of the problems is no one had really stopped Iran from doing this strategy. And I would argue they were emboldened by the Houthi performance in 2023 through 2025. And that has basically gotten us to the situation we're in today. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, hey, take a moment, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell so be alerted about new videos as they come out.